My name is Chastity, and I'm here to talk about my memories of being in the SSP. My earliest memory is when I was laying down on the church pew and my grandmother was praying with her friends, and they were singing and holding hands, and I was looking above their heads into the rafters of the church, and I was watching the lights. There was these beings that were light, and they were angels, and they were swirling around the heads and bouncing around up in the rafters of the church. And my grandma asked me what was I looking at, and I told her the lights, and she thought I meant the lights in the building, but it was the beings that I was seeing. And I would say probably the next thing I remember are dreams. In my childhood, when I was about 5 or 6, I had, I was Pentecostal, and we had this belief that, and this was when I was 6, we had this belief that if I didn't speak in tongues, that I was going to go to hell. And so it scared me so much that I would stay at the altar and pray and pray and pray. And I had a dream, and we didn't watch TV. The only time I saw any kind of TV was at my grandparents' house, and I would see cartoons. And I had a dream that I was in the middle of a forest, and it had a clearing, and there was a spaceship, and there were these tall blonde beings that shined really bright, and they were ushering people onto this craft, and they left me behind with a few others, told us that we couldn't come with them, that we had to stay here with the humans, and they left us. And when I woke up, I went running to my mom's room and said, "We missed the rapture. We missed the rapture," because I thought that's what I was dreaming about. And then I remember seeing a spider in the corner of my room that had red eyes that watched me all the time. And one night I was awake, and I heard somebody come in the house and come down the stairs. They had heavy boots, and they came to my doorway and stood there, and it was a male, and it was like, I called him the Shadow Man. And from that moment until I was 15, he followed me in my dreams. And by the time I was 15, he started having me come through like a portal in my dreams, and I would drop down into a dead forest, and I would run across these dead leaves. And then when I was 15, he finally caught up to me and was on me, strangling me. And I woke up and was levitating on my bed, or off of my bed, and he was strangling me. And I started screaming, "Jesus, Jesus," in my head, because I was paralyzed. I couldn't talk or anything like that. And then I eventually dropped down, and I had strangle marks on my neck, and I went and I showed my mom, and my mom thought that I did it to myself, because I had a lot of things going on at 15 that I started remembering. But back to when I was a kid, I remember we finally got a TV. My mom stopped going to the Pentecostal church, and we got a TV, and they were showing Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And when they showed the spaceship, I flipped out. I was like, that's what I saw. That's what I saw. I knew what that was, and I didn't know how I knew what that was. My mom and I were just baffled that I knew what that was, but I knew what it was. And so I had things like that. I remember, I don't remember a whole lot in between there and getting older. I know we moved around a lot. So I would say probably into my teens, is I started seeing things. I started seeing auras around people, but I didn't know what it was. But there were lights, different colored lights around people. And then I could see things on their backs that had them sometimes in chains. And I thought they were demons. My mom told me that her grandfather molested her, and that one time when I was young, probably about 3 to 4, she had taken me to their house for my great-grandmother to babysit me, and I screamed and locked myself in the car. And she never thought about it. She just never took me back. And so we thought that that was why I was having dreams like that. But when I talked to her about it later, she told me that he died before I was born. And so I don't know. And then around that time, had, I don't know exactly what it was, but there was something in the mirror in my bedroom. And it started telling me to kill myself. And I started cutting. I started drinking. And I just, like, my whole character changed. I went from this innocent, pure, sweet girl to just horrible mood swings, drinking, sneaking around and drinking. And I finally eventually tried to kill myself. And I actually, when I got to the hospital, they had to invoke trauma to me to keep me awake. And they put, like, I think it was like 7 liters of liquid charcoal down me to try and revive me. They had to strap me to the bed because I kept pulling out the needles and everything. And I don't remember any of this. It was told to me. I had lost control of my body functions. I did finally wake up, and they checked me. They monitored my heart, and there was absolutely nothing wrong with me. And when I had been going to church, and I told the pastor, this was before that I was seeing these things, he told me that I was a witch, and he wouldn't let me come back to church. And so I actually prayed, and I asked God to take it away from me because I didn't want to be bad. But in between that and then when I tried to kill myself, I was seeing a counselor, and he ended up being reptilian. And he tried to trick me into joining some kind of a coven that was in the city where I lived. And I got away, but he was trying to manipulate my gifts. And I just I just kept telling my mom I didn't want to go. I left home when I was 16 and continued with school, finished, graduated, did all, normal life things. And I started seeing things again. And I really didn't know what to do with them. So I started searching. Into my early 20s, I started reading books. One of them actually leapt off of a bookstore shelf. It was the Celestine Prophecy. I was walking through there, and it literally just jumped off the shelf and fell at my feet. And so I bought it and read it. I was like, oh, well, that's interesting. And so I started going to a different kind of church that they believed more in the gifts of the Spirit. And so I started learning a little bit more then and being accepted. And I started seeing angels around the church. They were holding presents, standing in front of people holding presents, and they were just waiting for people to ask them about these, whatever it was that they needed, and so they could give them to them, but people wouldn't do that. And then I moved, and I went to a church up in Kansas City, and I had always been told, like, I would get, well, when I was 8, backtrack a little. When I was 8, my grandfather came to me. I was at the babysitter's sick. I had a fever, and he came to me in a dream and told me that he was leaving and to watch over my mom and grandma, that they were going to need me. And I asked him, well, can't I go with you? And he said, no, you need to stay here. And I said, okay. And I wasn't taken back home. So my grandmother's best friend took me home. And 3 days later, then I got to see my mom and grandma. And they were about to tell me that my grandfather had died. And I said, well, I already know that Grandpa died, so what is going on? Why did we have to go over here to her house? And they were shocked because they hadn't even gotten it out of their mouth, and I already knew. And I even knew what time. I told them what time it was because there was a clock on the side, on the bed table beside me. I would watch shows, like I remember Firestarter, and I would remember and feel that energy that, you know, was conjured up to make the fire start. Like I always had very interesting dreams. Like I could fly. I knew martial arts, like I was a ninja or something. And I even had dreams about being a woman Tibetan monk that were so vivid it was like a whole movie. Another story was about being the wife of a veteran that had been killed in the war. And so I started piecing these things together, and I didn't believe in having other lifetimes because that was not right, you know, you can't do that. But when I started studying about all of these different things more, I realized that those were probably other lifetimes, but it took me a while to finally settle into peace with that. And it wasn't until I got married that I started having this blue orb. It would come in my room, and it was like a teardrop, and it would start, and then it would do this. It would like drop, and it would be beside the bed, and I would sit up and look at it and watch it, and then it wouldn't do anything. It would just go away. And sometimes I would wake up and look out the window, and it was like I had laser vision or something. You know how you flip the things at the eye doctor, which one looks better, 1 or 2, and you tell them. And it was like that. It was like my eyes adjusted like that, and I was like, what? And then I started having more and more, I called them downloads, or like the Holy Spirit talking to me, because I was still going to church. And they were just like, I started knowing things about people. Even growing up, I remember my mom getting on to me and yelling at me, and I would tell her what she was fixing to say to me, and she'd get mad because I had told her what she was about to say, and she didn't like that. And my mom said that I always had an inside line to God, because whenever I asked for something, I always got it. And so I got these channelings, and I always thought they were the Holy Spirit. I never called it anything different. The voice was never, it was always consistent, you know. And so I had this dream where I went onto a spaceship, and this was after the blue orb had visited me, and it was after I was married. and I went on this spaceship, and they took me on a tour, and it was like a triangle or a pyramid shaped, and in the middle of it, it had a plant. I don't know if it was one singular plant, but it was oxygen producing is what they told me, and that was how they helped the oxygen in the ship. And each level went up to the top, and then there was some that went down to the bottom also. So it was kind of like a pyramid with a pyramid on the bottom too. And they took me to see the children. They had like either holographic images that they were manipulating or playing with, and they also were floating blocks and different items. And then there was a lot of living quarters, like families lived on one floor, and then single men and then single women. And it was attached to another place. And it was, they told me that it was like a place that they had meetings of the galaxy. And I asked who, and it was the Galactic Federation. And when they got me to the ship, they even had put me in a special suit. They told me I had to wear this suit, and that it was white. It was shimmery white. It wasn't just plain white. It was shimmery, and it had red and blue stripes, like on one shoulder. And you went down like this to open it, and you went down like this to close it. And you didn't have to go to the bathroom. Your suit did, I don't know how it did it, but it recycled the urine. And I don't really ever remember eating on any of these ships or anything like that. But so back to this place that it was connected to. You walked down this long bridge, and you could look out and see the space. I don't know where it was located. I just know it was in space. And there was a red carpet that led to this building, and they took me in, and it reminded me, and it was after I had this dream that I saw something in Star Wars when they had those beings. I think there was like 3 in each like little pod on the sides, and it was, mine, it was like, it went, they were out like this, and then it went up. So it wasn't like this, it was like this. And there was this place in the middle that was a white circle, and you could stand on it, and it would raise you up so that you would be in front and be able to be seen by everybody. And so it was like balcony rooms where you walked behind, like in a theater. You walk and you go to your pod that's on the wall. And apparently I was used to going to one of those pods in the wall, and I thought that's where they were taking me. And they said, no, this time you need to get used to being on this platform, because you're going to testify for humanity and of all the atrocities that have been done to them. And I said, okay. And so they took me over to it, and it lifted up, and there was nobody in there. It was just, they wanted me to get used to it, to know what it felt like. And there were all kinds of different beings in there later, and they took me back in so that I could see all of them. I don't remember testifying, but I know they were getting me ready to do that. And the next thing I knew, I was back in my bed with my husband. And I tried to wake him up and he was out. And so that was the first time that I remember being taken. And then my downloads changed. I had a download from somebody named Mira. And I didn't know who she was. And I asked her, because I said, I've never heard a female voice before. Who are you? And she said, I'm Mira. And to verify, she said, I know you like confirmation of everything. She said, tomorrow there will be a channeling that the person that you listen to will have up on their channel on YouTube, and it will be from me. And sure enough, it was. And I was like, wow. And the main place that they seemed to start communicating with me was in the bathroom, especially during showers. They would interrupt my showers and I would have to get notebook and pen. So I kept notebooks and pens in my bedroom so that I could write them down. And one time they gave me like the history of the earth, and they told me about the destroyer of worlds and how they had come here, and that we were like the final battleground for these beings to be judged and sentenced. And that they had actually started, how did that go? I still have it at home. Well, they had been like flung out, kind of like the story from heaven, or about Satan getting kicked out of heaven or something like that. But they used different words, and they told me about that in the garden, that it wasn't an apple that was eaten. It was actually a changing of the DNA that was being done. And that's what the forbidden fruit was. And I had been studying molecular biology before I got married. And I dropped out because I had learned about all of this cloning that they wanted to do. And they were also doing virus manipulations. And at that time, that was how they were teaching everybody, because they were planning ahead. And I didn't want to be a part of it, so I dropped out. So I understood when they were talking about the modifications of the DNA that they did in the garden to the human race in order to change them. But I wrote a whole notebook, and it was very intense to experience something like that. And I got to where I couldn't handle going to church anymore because I was seeing things that it was like there were demons in the church at the pulpit controlling the pulpit, the pastors, and I couldn't handle it anymore. And so I told my husband, and we stopped going to church. And I really missed it. And we ended up going back to my church before he died, that I went to when I was 15, when I tried to kill myself the first time. And I have tried 3 times in my life to kill myself. Back to my 20s, when I was trying and searching, and I found that Celestine Prophecy book. It felt like something was pulling me a direction that I did not want to go, and because I felt like it was not a good direction, because it was going to make me a sinner and I was going to go to hell, and I was not wanting to do that. But it just kept happening over and over and over again. And so there was some other stuff that went on in my life. I lost all of my friends. I had a knee surgery, and I felt so alone. The job that I had loved, I lost because I started having body pains that nobody could explain. And so I didn't want to go home because I didn't get along with my mom. We always had a rocky relationship because she had me so young. She was 14. And so I just felt like I didn't have anybody or anywhere to go. And I was really just tired of life. And I just kept hearing, kill yourself, kill yourself, kill yourself. And so I tried. I took everything I could think of. And I was a pharmacy tech. So I knew what I was doing. And that was a really weird experience because I barricaded myself in my apartment. And I laid down on the couch after I drank a bottle of wine and took a pill concoction in a wine glass. It was this many pills. It was full. And I was alone. I put on my headphones and I was listening to In the Arms of an Angel. And because I just wanted to go far away from here. And when I woke up, my headphones were taken off, and neatly the cord was wrapped around them and placed beside my head. And I had vomited up all of that with blood on the floor. And somebody had to have sat me up and taken those off and did that. I didn't do it, and I don't remember any of it after I fell asleep. I didn't know about altars until 2018. So at the time, I just attributed it to angels. I have seen angels. I've had Gabriel, Michael, and Raphael talk to me. They physically come, and I was driving around the time that I was contemplating the suicide with the pills, and I was driving around Wichita in circles, and I looked over and I saw this car lot, and I was told to go down to the car lot, and it's like midnight. And so I went down there and I was told to look at the cars. So I'm out walking amongst these cars that are for sale and thinking, what the hell am I doing? And this guy comes out and he's dressed like a car salesman, and I'm thinking, man, I just bought my car. I don't need another car. And he comes over and he holds out his hands and he says, "Hi, I'm Michael." And I shook his hand, and he said, "So, you want to buy a new car?" And I said, "No, I just bought mine." And he goes, "So, okay. So you don't know why you're here?" And I said, "No, I was told to come down here while I was driving around the highway." And he says, "Well," he goes, "you're going to act like you're here to buy a car. We're going to go inside, and I'm going to tell you what's going to happen in the future so that when it starts to unfold, you'll know what time it is." And I was like, "What?" And he said, "I'm Michael." And I was just like, "Oh." And so that's what we did. And we went in, and he gave me some paperwork for me to act like I'm filling out for a credit check. And he's telling me about the end times, about what was going to start appearing and happening. And these were the signs that it was getting ready to come to a certain time and time frame. And he said, "I know this was a lot to take in." And I was like, "How am I going to remember this?" Because he wouldn't let me take notes. And he said that when it's time, I will be reminded. And he said, "Now you can call tomorrow here and ask for me, but I'm not here, and they're not even going to remember because this place wasn't open." And I was just like, what? So I did call to see what they would say, and they said, "We weren't open last night. You couldn't have come here, and we don't have anybody here by the name of Michael." So when I went on a trip after my grandmother died, I seen Raphael and I seen Gabriel. And they were both wearing sunglasses at 4 o'clock in the morning in LA. I was on the shuttle going back to the airport to come home from a conference that I had been at. And they took me, and they took their glasses down and looked at me, and they said, "So, how was your trip, Chastity?" And I'm like, "I didn't tell you my name. How do you know my name?" And then I saw their name tag. And it actually said Raphael, and the other guy had Gabriel. And I was just like, oh, wow. And their eyes were really blue, and like fire, and like blue fire. And they told me, they said, now, on your way home, you're going to have a tailwind behind you, and you're going to arrive home early. That's how you're going to know that we were real. And sure enough, that's what happened. And so I've had experiences like that. So that's why I just always thought it was angels. Michael, what he told me about the future, he said that I would start seeing large convoys of military vehicles on the highways, and there would be no explanation as to why. He said that there was going to be martial law declared in many places, and they would use the excuse of disasters to do it, and they would never lift it, but they would just use them to increasingly take our freedoms away from us or make things harder for us to accomplish freely. He said that the prices would go up really high. He said that, and some of them I can't remember, so when they happen, then I remember. Those are the main things that I started to see happen after I was married. And I saw him when I was in my early 20s, and I didn't get married until I was almost 30. And I think I was about 35, so it was plenty of years that had passed before I started seeing all the convoys. And as soon as I saw these convoys, I heard his voice, like in my head, tell me, these are the things that I was telling you about. And so that's all I really remember, because they've happened. Some of my special abilities that started happening in this life is that I see people's thoughts, and so I have like telepathic abilities. It's like there's a screen inside of my head, and I'll see what they are seeing, or I'll see where they are while they're talking to me, or who they're with. For instance, my mom, I was at the hospital with one of my kids and my husband, and my mom, I called her to tell her about what was going on, and she had told me that she wanted to come up there, but she was with somebody that she didn't want me to know about because she had a new boyfriend. And so I said, oh, well, I see the man standing next to you. And I said, she goes, how do you do that? And I said, I don't know, Mom, but you know how it is. And she goes, okay, fine, describe him. So I did, to a T. And she was just like, and she had put me on speaker so that he could hear that I was doing this. And she's like, I can't get away with anything. She always knows. And so that, and then I've also had other people that have died come to me to give me messages for their loved ones. A neighbor, her son, they didn't know if it was an accident or not, or if he was found, he had shot himself in the head. That's what they thought. And it was actually an accident. He didn't plan that. It just happened. And so that was the message that I got to give her. And then another person during a meditation group, her father came and asked if I could talk to his daughter, who was sitting next to me, and I didn't know her. And so I said yes. And he told me to tell her, that he loved her and he was proud of her, and gave me something, a name that he had called her, and a phrase that he always said to her. And it healed her so much that she stepped into her purpose. And I met her later, and I didn't even recognize her. And she said, it's because of you that I did this. And I said, I said, well, you're welcome, but it's not because of me. It's just what you needed at the time. So, one time, well, a lot in church during prayer, I would feel this electric energy come across me, and we were reaching over to take hands to pray for the one next to us, and this lady like instantly just collapsed on the floor. And then the next thing I know, so I'm going to use the language from church, but the Holy Spirit took over and started rebuking a demon out of this person, and she was manifesting on the floor, and it was like I stepped back and was just watching. So I've had that happen to me a couple of times. And when my husband had cancer, and I was praying for him, there was people around us, and I went into this other language and was praying for him, and it was so powerful that the heat that was created around us drenched everybody, and especially myself and my husband. We were like wet from sweat from the heat that was created from me praying for him. And I seen there was a tornado that was coming. This happened twice. There was a tornado coming, and I like got on my tippy toes. It was just like I was taken over again by the Spirit, and I spoke to it in the other language, and it went up into the clouds. And my husband was next to me. This pastor was next to me, and he was like, "Wow, does that happen often to my husband?" And he said, "Yes, all the time." And when we went back in the house, he was like, "That tornado, it just went up in itself after she said whatever she said to it." And the newsman, he goes, "Well, we don't really know what happened. It just kind of like went up into itself and went back into the sky." So it was on the news. And then I have one time just in conversation, I had Bashar come through me and answer somebody's question, and my voice changed and everything to sound like his. It was very interesting. And a lot of the things I don't know that I can do until somebody is like desiring it that I'm talking to. So I'm still learning. My relationship to Jesus is that I'm actually directly in his lineage. My husband, before he died, traced me all the way back to Adam and Eve, and I go through Joseph, and so I thought that was really cool. And then I was drawn to some books in a store called The Second Coming of Christ that a yogi had written, because he said that he sat with Jesus and Jesus told him what the New Testament was supposed to say. And I didn't know any of this when I saw these books. I was just extremely drawn to them, like I had to have them. And so I went over, and as soon as I opened up the book and I looked inside, I saw this yogi's picture, and I was just in love with this guy. Not romantically, just it felt like he was a part of me, and I loved him like I loved myself, and I felt like he was me, you know, and I was like, how is this possible? And so then that's when I came about the story that Jesus had come to him and given him the true New Testament. And I have the books, but I haven't ever read them. But I started feeling like I was Jesus, and that just totally freaked me out. As you know, that's just hypocrisy. And so there was just no way. And I finally kept sitting with it and sitting with it and sitting with it. Like, why would I even want to say something like that? That's not even my character or my nature to try to be, something like that. And so I was like, well, this must be real, and I thought, well, it could just be the fact that, since he is in my DNA line, that I have his memories in my cellular structure. And so maybe that's how I'm Jesus, is because he's my ancestor, so in whatever way or fashion, I finally got to some peace with it. And so that's how I'm related to Jesus. I didn't know anything about the secret space program or anything like that. I had no vocabulary at all. I just felt like I had been taken and shown things, and I didn't know why, and I didn't even have verbiage for it to tell anybody about it. And after my husband died, he and I watched Ancient Aliens a lot before he died, and so I thought, well, I'm going to look for something with one of those people in it on YouTube. So I did, and David Wilcock came up, and he was interviewing Corey Good, and he was telling his story, and I sat down and started listening to it, and it shook me to my core that somebody else was having the same things happen to them that I was having. And I had never heard anybody talk about it before. And I ended up sitting down on the floor on my knees crying because I didn't know what to do after that, especially since my husband had just died. And so I was just like, man, and I started having memories come back and more channelings or downloads. And I still don't get real comfortable with verbiage. I'm like, do I call it a channeling or do I call it a download? I did come to the terms that Holy Spirit is my higher self. And so I started asking whenever I would have somebody talk to me, give me a download. I was like, who is this? And so I started being told that these were ancestors that were in my family line. And I would look at my genealogy, and sure enough, I would find them. But I just kept, watching the program that they had when I could, as I was unpacking, because we had lost our house in foreclosure, and so I had 4 kids, and I was trying to figure out life because I had no family around, and his family had rejected us. So I was alone again, and I started remembering things, and a lot of them came to me in dreams. I didn't know what to do with these dreams. I would have dreams about being in a space war, and I just remember there being a lot of ships around, and that I was in one of those and shooting at other ships. That's all I really remember about that. I've never tried to regress or anything like that with anybody. And I even tried not to listen to anybody else's testimonies about that because I didn't want it to change mine. And so I remember just being on ships. I remember seeing huge ships, like when I was going down that red carpet. And that time that I remember this, there were the other beings in that auditorium. And I remember looking out and seeing a massive ship. It was so big it could have been a city. And I didn't really well, a lot of times I was triggered through movies that I would watch. And there was a movie that we were watching, my husband and I, before he died. And it had it was about these two teenagers that were taken and they were used to procreate a hybrid. And I started crying like uncontrollably about this. And later I had the memory of it. And so I probably have a child out there somewhere that I don't know. And I get really triggered when I hear other people talk about things, their experiences, and it makes me disassociate. Sometimes I want to puke. And so I haven't really explored it in depth, but those are the things I remember. Is just, I have a lot of feelings about it. I know I did discuss with my mom if there was any strange things that happened around my birth. And because I was born in Luke Air Force Base Hospital. And so she told me, she was 14. And that the doctor had her whole pregnancy been trying to get me to let him have his friends adopt me because, she was so young and she really didn't need to be raising a child at that age. And she would tell him no. She also... I thought this was significant after I started but she told me this before I had these emotions about feeling like I was Jesus. She told me that she did not have sex with my dad. That he had ejaculated outside of her, and that's how I got pregnant. So when she was about to have me, about a month into to the delivery of me, she still needed to have her hymen broke. And they said that if my dad didn't do it, that the doctor was going to have to do it, and if she didn't have it done, she would die probably having me, because it was really hard on that age of a child to have a baby, especially with the hymen still intact. And so she talked to my dad, but she didn't want to have sex. But they did. And she, I'm sure that I have some womb trauma from that. Because she said, it was like being raped because she didn't want to. And then, so I thought it was interesting. I said, so Mom, I'm immaculate conception. And she goes, well, I don't know about all that, but I take it for what it's worth. She's told me that story twice, and the same every time. She and I were talking about my birth certificate because I was going to do an astrology chart, and I asked her if she knew what time I was born. She said, "Oh yeah, like 12:30 or something like that." And I said, "Why does my birth certificate say 2:05 then?" And she's like, "No, it was like 12:30," and so that was different. They changed my name. She wanted it to be Chastity, like ITY, and they put it TITY. The nurse said that my mom was too young to know how to spell it right. They would not let me go into my mom's room. It was like 6 hours or so. And my grandma called my grandfather to tell him to come and get me and bring me to my mom. And didn't know the significance of that until I had went to the conference that Corey had, and he was saying that the kind of contracts they have in taking bastard children, because my father wasn't there to sign the certificate, is that it can only be revoked by grandparents, especially when it's a minor that's involved as the parent or the mother of the child. So I was like, this, all these little synchronicities of events just started making me really question, and it made me scared because I had a lot of feelings and emotions and gaps in time that I just didn't understand. I was taking my kids to school, and I noticed that there were fairy rings all around my city that I lived in, and I was commenting to the kids, look at all these fairy rings. Oh, how cool. And they were like, yeah, Mom, whatever. And so I dropped them off, and I was just driving around looking at all of them. They were like everywhere. And it hadn't rained. So there was no reason for them to even be popping up that I knew of, because there was no rain. We were dry. And as I was driving home, I was told to go to the park, that I needed to be in a meeting. And so I went to the park, and I was told to walk around to this back area, and I did. There was this really huge fairy ring, one opening. You could go in and out, and that one spot, and that was it. And I was like, that's a true fairy ring. And it was very windy, and I was told to go in, and I was like, oh man, I've heard about these things. So I went in, and as soon as I got in, I saw all of these elders of all of the different folklore, mythical creatures that you hear about in, those stories that are nighttime, bedtime stories you tell to your kids. And I'm like, wow. And they said, we would like you to be our human representative. I was like, okay. And they said that they were having a meeting to discuss whether or not they were going to reveal themselves to the humans, whether they were ready or not for them. And I started to speak, and they said, no, you can only speak unless you're spoken to, because you're not one of us. And I was like, oh, okay. So I just listened, and I could understand all of them, even though they were speaking their language. I could understand them. It was like I had a translator on or something. And I just stood there and listened to them, and it was like just a meeting of the minds. Are they ready? And why do you think that they're not? Or why do you think that they are? Is what they were discussing amongst themselves. And there were some of them that just were very adamant that they did not ever want to take that chance, because it would cost them their lives. And they had barely made it through the last time that they were known. And so it actually lasted like 2 or 3 hours. It felt like I was just in there for 10 minutes, but when I got out, I had been in there for like 2 or 3 hours, and I was just like, whoa, okay, that really happened. But they asked me, they said, what do I think about the humans, and are they ready to start seeing the other dimensional beings? And I said, well, some of them are. They're really coming along. And I said, there's this awakening shift of consciousness that's going on. And so I said, they're coming along. So I think that some of us are ready to see you and interact with you. And they said, okay. And so they said that they voted, and they said that they would start revealing themselves more and more, like in a time frame from like 5 to 10 years. And, that they would start interacting with the people that could see them. And it started happening. I've been watching it. When I was in my 20s, well, actually back to when I was 12, some missionaries came, and that was the first time that I met Gabriel and Raphael. They were missionaries that came to our church, and we were having a conference, and they were talking about be somebody, be a soul winner. And I was like, I want to do that. And I was the only one that said yes. And they brought me up to the front, and they said, we're going to tell you something, and it won't make any sense to you right now, but later in your life it will. And I was like, oh, okay. And they said, you walk in the office of a prophet, and there are thousands, millions of people that are waiting on you to help free them. And they said, it'll be bigger than Billy Graham. And I was just like, I don't even know who that is. I don't know what that is. And they said, just put it in a bottle and put it on the back of a shelf in your mind, and it'll come back to you when you need it. So fast forward to my 20s, I start getting told to read books about Enoch. And I'm like, okay, so I'm reading all these books about Enoch. And I had already gone to a church prior to this up in Kansas City that was known for its prophetic movement. And I remember being in a meeting that was specifically geared towards people that were prophetic, and I didn't know what I was doing, and I didn't know whose house I was in until I went home and told my aunt and uncle about what happened. And so I was in the house of a major prophet at that time that was very well known, unbeknownst to me, because I didn't follow anybody. And they prophesied over me pretty much the same thing that I was told when I was 12, except for they added that my shoes were shodded with peace. And I was like, wow. They said I was a peacemaker, a peacekeeper. And I said, okay. So fast forward a couple more years, and I had my daughter. And so this was in the 2000s. I think it was maybe around 2002 or 2003. And I had a dream that I was in this house, and there were all these prophets in there, but I didn't seem to fit in with any of them. And so I went to the kitchen in this house, and I was getting a glass of water, and all of a sudden I hear this voice behind me, and he says, you know, you're not like them. And I turned around, and it was Jesus. And I said, yeah, I can feel that I'm not like them, but I don't understand. I thought I was supposed to be this prophet. And he said, well, they are prophets, but you walk in the office of a prophet, and there's a difference. And I said, well, I don't even know what a prophet is, other than somebody that was giving help to the kings in the Old Testament, and he said, well, you're a seer. And he said, and you see things down the road. They don't. They see things right now. And he said, you can do that, right? And I said, yeah. And so he said, your name is Revelator of Fire. And that freaked me out. I was like, whoa, that sounds dangerous. And so I woke up, and I just kept that. And I've told people that, but I've never been public with that. And so over the years, I learned more and more. I started learning about the Melchizedek order, and I learned that I was a part of the Melchizedek order, and I really haven't known what to do with any of this, but I just just kept going with the flow and just, learning about everything that was presented to me and taking what resonated and not remembering what didn't. And I eventually came to the conclusion that my mission is to help respark the fire that gives people passions for life. So I've had to wait a long time because we haven't gotten to that point yet in time where that's going to be like the focus. We're getting there though. There's some like wispy, kind of like fairy type over in this room, part of the room around you. And there's a really tall female right here behind you. I was asking her your name or her name, and I don't understand what she's saying. She has like strawberry blonde hair and really pretty blue eyes and a nice, simple, sweet smile. And she's pretty tall. There's others, but they're kind of hazy. They're just observing us and what's taking place. Kind of, I call them a cloud of witnesses is how I term them, because they don't really reveal their faces to me. They're there. I can see them, but they're like cloudy. But the fairies are over here. They're really chatty. I can't understand what they're saying, but they're really chatty. Yeah. And you have yellow, a big band of yellow that's around you. And
Around who?
Around you. Around James. That was mainly what showed up when I was looking earlier. And so, yeah.
It just touched me right here.
It was her. I do offer services. I haven't started doing that as a business or anything like that. I've just, because I've been busy raising kids, and I'm starting to venture out and be more open and public about my abilities, and I would like to start offering them more and just go from there and go with the flow and see what happens. I love to teach. I was a homeschooler, or I still homeschool, but my middle son, he just graduated, and so I have one more at home, but he's wanting to go to public schools. But I started homeschooling with my daughter, so it's been over 23 years. And I'm going to be setting up a website and all that stuff soon. Some of the future projects that I want to work on is a curriculum for older children and adults to start discovering their authentic self and their passions and their purpose, being reconnected to the creativeness that they have inside of them that has been stifled, and help those reignite the fire that I was told that I carry is like the spark of life, that I help after people have gone through their tragedies in life or their traumas, that I bring peace, and that I help them reignite back into who they were created and who they came here to be. And I've seen it happen with multiple people in my life that I have come across, that I've either spoken a word or helped them start something, and they blossom into who they're supposed to be. And it's just awesome to watch. And so I want to get more active in that. I would like to set up a web page that I put my channelings or my downloads that I've received and kept over the years, because I feel that they're still relevant, because I think time is relevant. So, there's going to be other people that it's going to speak to help them with where they're at. So I'd like to share those. Don't be afraid to start talking about the things that you've experienced, because it says that they shall overcome by their testimony. And I always wondered, what does that mean? And my answer that I got is that as we share our testimony or our story, our history, that it helps somebody else, because we became overcomers and masters of our experiences by going through them. And when we share them, it causes others to have the tools to get through something similar that they're going through. And so don't be afraid to tell your story, because somebody out there needs to hear it. And I want to thank you, James, for letting me share my story. When I was a child, my mom was 14 when she had me, and I was told, and I remember some of it, going back and forth between her and my grandmother. And when my mom was working at an A&W restaurant, she met this lady named Wanda, and she invited my mom to church, and she became a lifelong person in my life, and I called her Grandma Wanda. And she later told me the stories about me seeing the lights in the church above her, and that I was looking at those, but I remembered, that I was seeing the beings. But later she told me, when I was telling her about the secret space program, that she had worked for NASA, and I had been telling her about what I had learned about the moon pictures and how they had been scrubbed, and she goes, "Oh yeah, I did that." And I was like, "What?" And so she told me about how there was her and like about 8 other women, and they would have pictures brought into them, and they would square places of the moon out so that they couldn't be seen. And she said she did that for a little while, and then she went into other positions. She didn't really go into detail about those. So it was like she wouldn't tell me unless I brought it up. And I don't have her name, or of the husband that she was married to at the time. I don't have it memorized, but I have it written down at home. But he was really big in the industry. I don't really know what industry it was, but they had a really big house, and all of the top executives, including William Branham, would come over to the house and party. They would have big, large dinner parties, and she said that she never really felt like socializing with these people because they just didn't seem right. And she didn't know who William Branham was until I showed her the picture, and she was like, "Yeah, he was there all the time." And I was like, "Oh my goodness." And then I always thought she was from Oklahoma, and when I was helping her do some genealogy, because her maiden name was Wright, and she always thought she was related to the Wright brothers. Come to find out, she was from Roswell. And I said, "Oh, so have you seen any spaceships?" And she said, "Well, not necessarily there," but she said that she was going to pick up her husband, and there was a craft, a circle craft that was going down the runway, and it was going the speed of the car with her down the runway. She was on the outside of the military fence, and that was on the inside of the military fence. So I always wondered, what our connection was, but we were close, like we were related. And I hadn't seen her in 20 years, and when we finally met up, we were dressed alike. So that's how close we were. The structures that she saw on the moon, she said there were actual buildings there. Some of them were tall, some of them were short. She said that some were inside. They had to scrub the openings and the buildings. And she said that it was incredible. She said it was like a city on the moon. She said it's just... and she said that on the dark side of the moon, that there's a lot, especially over on that side. And so that's about all I remember. She just said it's like cities, and they have tall buildings just like we do, and short, squatty ones, and lots of tunnels. What I remember about going into underground tunnels is being led down a long corridor to what was like what I remember like a subway. And we got on this car. There was seats on this side, seats on this side, and they were facing each other. And you had to strap yourself in, they said, because it goes really fast. And if you're not strapped down, you'll fly all over it. And so when we got on and sat down, strapped in, and everybody was about the same age. We were probably in our early 20s or so, and there was male and female. We were dressed all alike. I think what is in my head right now as I'm remembering is a gray suit that zipped up the front. Nothing really elaborate. And we didn't know where we were going. We were just told to go down this walkway and get inside this ship. I think there was 4 or 5 on each row. I think there was 5 on each row. And the seats were red. Everything was white, though, otherwise. Like, it was just pristine. And when we all were strapped up, and then the leaders, they strapped in behind us on either side. There was some. And then we just took off. And when we stopped, we got out, and they told us not to interact with anybody, that we were just to follow them, and they would take us where we needed to go. And I remember passing a lot of people. It was just like being on a train or a subway area, and but nobody spoke to each other. You just looked, and you were afraid to make eye contact with anybody. And we all were taken separately to different places, and some of us were doing maintenance, some of us were cleaning. Like, the maintenance crew was more like working on engines and stuff like that, and then there was like cooks, and then the cleaners, and we all had like just everyday essential needs that we took care of, And it was a community-based thing, but we didn't fellowship. It was very structured. So one of the ships that I was taken on, they put me in a room, like a hotel room, except for it was high tech. And anything that I wanted, I just was told to go over to this replicator. And it was like a place in the wall. And I thought about it, and then it would make it. I didn't have to tell it to do anything. I just thought about it. And that was really cool. Anything, like if I wanted a chocolate chip cookie or something like that, I could have had it. What did I use it for? Honestly, don't remember using it other than being shown how to use it. And the beds, they looked like they wouldn't be comfortable, but when you got on them, it felt like a cloud. And it was better than memory foam or anything like that. They were just, it like felt like you were being cradled. It was just the right temperature and the best night's sleep. And everything was always very structured. Feng shui, I guess, would be a good word for it. The energy flowed in the room really well, and there were no lights. No lights. It was always, there was like, it wasn't dark unless you wanted it to be dark, but I don't remember anywhere on that ship there being lights. It was just luminescent on its own. And I did remember asking about that, and they said that they didn't need any lights. I was taken there as an ambassador to this particular ship, and they told me that I was going to live there, that I would help teach the children, and that's something that I do in this life, so it wasn't very surprising to me. So that's why they took me to the children and was showing me what they do. And they did have these, they looked like eggs, and they were along the wall, the back of the wall, and where the kids were. And they didn't have to do anything but sit there in front of the screen, and it would just play all of this stuff really fast in front of them. And they didn't get to be there until they were older, not like toddlers. They weren't put there. They had to be a little older to be put in front of those. And those, the toddlers, and they would be on the floor, and they would work with I call them in this life, I call them a manipulative, and they were either holographic or they were like blocks or whatever, and they were practicing telekinesis, and they were already doing like geometry, but it was in like the holographic form, like Tetris or something, how they were learning to put the shapes in to stack them and make things, and they were taught colors through holographs. So, and they talked different languages. There was, I would say, as far as the beings and what type of beings were there, I would say different varieties of the human race. There were Asian and blacks, whites, Indians. So, some had red hair, some had brown, and it was just all of us were there. And they had, those particular kids that I was brought in to watch, they were born on that ship. And there were families there, there were individuals there, but the women and the men were kept separate if they were single. They lived on different floors. And I don't really know what they did, like everybody else did, but they all had individual life skills and essentials that they provided for the ship. And mine was to be the teacher while I was on the ship, but then otherwise I was to be an ambassador in the auditorium when they would have their galactic meetings. I don't know if it was on this ship, but I do remember early on when I was younger, when I was on a ship, being given this, it was very floppy. It was a thin piece of plastic that was clear, and it was thicker than paper, but it flopped around. And you didn't want to do that too much though, because it would break it. they rolled them up into what looked like a pin, and then you pulled it out. And we had pockets, and like on one side, I believe it was the right side, our names were there, and then we could put the pin over here, and it was disguised like that because we weren't supposed to take things like that into the auditorium. And there were 3 of us, and we would sit behind the representatives, and we were there to tap into the other beings to read them, and then we would record on those so they were like tablets, and we would record on those what the different beings were feeling, thinking, or even intending when the other speakers of the auditorium would talk about and discuss topics of the universe. It wasn't, it was like a macrocosm UN meeting or something like that, or Hague Convention, but it was galactic. So there was all types of different beings in these pods. And what triggered my memory of that was watching Star Wars. And when they were having the meeting, and I don't even know which one it is because I get them all confused. But they showed something like that, and I was like, whoa, I've seen that before. I said, is this in something else in one of these other shows? And my husband said, no, this is the only one that this has been in. It hasn't been shown before. And I was like, oh. And then it just, all these memories came back with the tablet and sitting there behind these 3 representatives that were our representatives of the human race, and then tapping into people. And that led to my memory of being the empath that sat next to a captain in a ship to read the beings that were coming through as they traveled across the universe and galaxies. And so that's how some of my memories came back. I do know that they were talking about a war that was upcoming, and some of the other wars that had gone on around other planetary systems, other solar systems, and what they were going to do about it. And I remember when I was focusing in, trying to see if I was a good guy or a bad guy, and I got the feeling that these were good guys, and what I got was that it was the Galactic Federation, and so I was okay with that. The instant education machine is the egg that I was talking about. It wasn't like a full cubicle, like how, there's walls that go so you can't see side to side. It was just like a chair that was ergonomic, and then the place where the screen was like an egg shape, an oval shape. But the kids could actually look over at each other, but they were so tuned into the screen they didn't. I have a lot of missing time in my life. I wasn't given instantly to my mother when I was born. I had to wait like 6 to 8 hours. I get conflicting. I was told by my mom and my grandmother that 2 different times. So my mom said it was like 6 hours. My grandmother said it was like 8 hours. And so during that time, I was supposedly in the nursery. And my grandfather, who was a tech sergeant, came and got me after my grandmother called him to come and get me and do something. You got to come and do something, get Chas and bring her to Sue. And so he did. And then on my birth certificate, I believe it's either 205 or 250. I can't remember since I don't have it in front of me. But my mom, when I was talking to her about the doctor, and my grandmother had told me that the doctor wanted me to be adopted by some of his friends. And this is at Luke Air Force Base. And so when I was talking to my mom about that, and then I wanted to do my astrology chart, I was telling her about my time of birth. And she said, no. I believe you was born around 12:30. And I would remember that. It was either 12:30, 12:35, somewhere in between there. But that's when you were born. And I said, that's not what my birth certificate says. And she was like, really? So I have that. And then, my mom was 14. My grandmother wanted her to finish school. And so as I grew up, I remember my grandmother being there, but not my mom. And she did graduate from high school and went on to be a nurse. But I was told that, my grandmother said my mom left me. My mom said my grandmother took me. And as I got to thinking and trying to remember those years, I can only remember one or two events out of these years between kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade. Fifth grade, there gets to be more memories. But otherwise, there's like 1 to 2 memories out of all of those years, each year, and that's it. And I thought, wow, I think I do have some missing time there, because I should remember more. Those are, years that you should have memories. And I don't. I learned about Michael Tellinger through Ancient Aliens. And while I was homeschooling my kids, we used Ancient Aliens for history. And Michael Tellinger became one of my favorites. And so we were watching some YouTube videos that he had on his station or his channel, and he had found these rocks that were different sizes, but they were all about this kind of a shape. And some were big, some were small, but they were all like this, and they reminded me of the keys of a xylophone, or the bars of a xylophone. And in my head, I started having these images of them being tapped, and these people walking around circles, and they were supposed to be so far away from each other, and they would tap these at the same time, and I could see this vibration going between them, and it created a vortex in these circles of stone. And so when he started talking about them, he's like, I don't know what they are, but they're everywhere. And I said, they're like tuning forks. They're tuning stones. And what I saw was that these people that would do that, they would create or heal. And so I started trying to tap into Michael and be like, hey, this is what they do. And then a couple of videos later, then he was like, I'm pretty sure this is what they do. He started meeting with experts, and it come to find out that they got what I was sending to them. However, be that they did get it, but that's what they said that they were for. And so that was really cool. And then he went on a tour to Adam's calendar. And I was watching this on video, and I started really getting shaken, and I started feeling stuff, and I blurted, he was talking about, we don't know what this was, and I was just like, it was a place where the DNA was manipulated and changed, and there was creation brought in. They were changing the human race, and it was all about how the soul came in, and I started having memories of a past life where I was a scientist and I was participating in that, and that was how I knew. And I thought, wow, that's really interesting, since I was going into molecular biology in this lifetime, and it really interfered with my morals, and so I dropped out of college. The tuning stones are used for, they create a frequency, and it's bounced around the stone circles that they have, and the priests, there's 3 or 4 of them, and they keep a certain distance between them, and they walk around and hit those, and they create this vibration, and it creates a frequency, and it just starts pulsing in there. And with them walking around, it creates a vortex. And some people can go in there if they are needing healing, and others, it's a way to create a vortex of manifestation, so that whatever it is that you're wanting can come into your life or be created. It's like energy, creating the energy for creation or manifestation. And sometimes, I think that it could be used for a portal. I didn't necessarily see anybody going down into the earth, but I think it could probably be used for something like that too. In one of my lifetimes, my name was Leon Hante, and I was a Lemurian princess, and I was the daughter of a chief. And when I started having the memory, I was outside meditating, and I remembered being in this pristine place of, a garden. Like, there was flowers everywhere. It was green. There was a pool of water with a waterfall that went into it. And I was communing with nature there. And just, it was very peaceful. And then all of a sudden I was grabbed from behind and taken. And my captor, I knew them. And I had been friending some Atlanteans that had been coming over to where we were. And I felt that we needed to have peace between us, but they were always warring back and forth. And so they had captured me, but they weren't mean to me necessarily. When they took me, they just took me from behind, and it, took me off guard. And they told me they would not hurt me, but they wanted to use me to get my father to come to them so that they could talk, and because they wanted to come onto our land. And I said, okay. And when I got to Atlantia, they put me in a jail cell. And this lady, well, she was a girl, because I was a girl too. She would feel sorry for me. She was the one that went and fed the people. And we didn't get very much to eat. And so there was a window up here that she would walk by and sneak some food into me. And the next thing I know is that she was coming around, and she said, we were talking, and then she's like, oh no. And everybody, all I could hear was a whole bunch of screaming and shouting and just like panic. And I was like, what's going on? Get me out of here. Get me out of here. And she says, I can't, I don't have the keys. And the next thing I know, there's just water everywhere, and I drowned. And I actually met that girl in this lifetime, and we're friends. We live in the same, almost the same city, and we were talking. We found that out because we were sharing our experiences of those lifetimes, and that's how we figured out that's how we knew each other. The flood, when it came in, it felt like it was just like suddenly overtaken. Like there was just this deluge of water, and it didn't like slowly rise. It was just there, and that was it. One of my memories is about being in a war, a space war, and the ships were intuitive, so you could either be in them or be out of them, and still be able to control them. And I remember being out of them a lot. They didn't like me to get in the ships because of my abilities being so strong that they didn't want to lose me as an asset. And so a lot of times I was back on the main ship controlling my smaller ship as it went into battle. And it was a space battle in space, so just use your imagination there. But I guided it intuitively. And on top of doing that, I could lead our ships into where the other ships were that we were coming up against, to the enemy ships. And sometimes I would lead our people in the ships to the enemy to take them out. And it was a lot of surprise attacks because I was able to intuitively know where they were located because I could remote view them. During the time that I flew those ships, I was, I don't know what branch or anything like that. I just remember going into an office that was really big, and it seemed like it was high in the sky, but what I realized is that it was probably more like on a floating city in the sky. And the windows started at about chair rail height, and they went all the way up, and they were really tall because some of the beings that came in there took up that whole space. And I was used in that office to read people, beings that would come in there. And then the officer that was in charge, his name was Ivan, and we got close to the point where we were lovers. And we spent a lot of time doing these things. He had a family, but he didn't really get to see them. And the uniforms, they were like a dark gray and I remember them being very stiff. And these hats they reminded me of, like, you know how the graduation caps, they fit down on your head, and there's like this point and in the front and the back, and it holds it and shapes it to your head. That's what I remember about the hats. And there was a long walk to the desk, and it was carpeted with this red carpet on top of the other carpet that was in the room. And it went all the way up to the desk and under it and to that wall. So it was wall to wall, a length of the room, red carpet. And then there were a couple of chairs there, and that were rarely used, honestly, unless it was me sitting in one giving report. And then the desk, and then up these two walls behind, on either side, there was the Nazi flag hanging. It wasn't on a spaceship. I remember looking outside and seeing blue sky and clouds. I didn't see any land. I just saw blue sky and clouds. So that's what made me think it was either high up in a building or floating in the sky. So as far as like what went on in that office, there were beings that were brought in to report to why they were here, what their intentions were for their visit. They were coming into our territory, and they needed to get permission. And usually it was other leaders of ships, colonies that were on ships that had their communities and their families that they were bringing here, and they needed permission. I just want to say thank you to James for interviewing me and giving me the space and time to come forward with my story. And I really appreciate getting to share my story, and I hope that it helps somebody else step forward and get through their memories or remember so that they can heal and have a healthier and happier life. And that's this first step, is realizing and accepting and sharing. Thank you.
Please consider supporting Super Soldier Talk by purchasing your own Neo Meditation device. Your Neo Meditation device will help you reduce stress, integrate trauma, enhance intuition, enhance clairvoyance, and enhance creativity. Get yours now at www.neologicaltech.com.